All right, are we ready? I want to talk about a couple concepts today as we look at Scripture and the timeline that we've viewed so far. We've captured everything, and it's important to think about the timeline that we've had from the beginning to the end. You could say we've had the Alpha and the Omega. And now what is it that we have here? What are we looking at? You might consider it a body of knowledge. What is the function of the Bible? What does it do? And then you might ask a different question, go to the meta, which is above, the above structure. What is the function of a religion? And what does it do? Or what is imagine that you had no Bible and you had no beliefs, but you were responsible for coming up with a cultural mechanism for how people should behave, what people should understand, and how they could transform into something better. Does that make sense? And so it kind of helps step away from the Bible for a second. Imagine that you have to do that. And then once you have that process in place, or once you have that concept in place, then come back to the Bible and re-examine it again. So I don't like the word religion, but we're going to call this a religion, or you might call it an ethos, or a cultural ethos, or a cultural system of beliefs, or a reality tunnel, a worldview, something like that, right? And there are basically, in my opinion, and you can tell me if you think differently, two prongs of a religion that in order to be functional. Now in the book of James it says pure religion and undefiled before God is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. But the particular context of that is what's going on at that particular time, and it's written to the 12 tribes. If we take it to a broader scope, what are we looking at the two prongs? And I think one of the first prongs is one of the things that comes up when you debate something like Christianity versus atheism all the time, or theism versus atheism. And the first prong is the behavior which results in the most desirable consequences. In most desirable consequences. Does that make sense? I think anybody would want that who isn't a nihilist. And a nihilist might be somebody who would go shoot up a school or something, you know. So we're not talking about, but any reasonable person would want something that produces behavior which results in the most, I just put most consequences, most desirable consequences. And you might say those desirable consequences would minimize suffering as a starter. For example, just to give you an example of what a desirable consequence is. And then the next thing, and I'm going to introduce a new word, is explanation of encounters with the numinous. Anybody want to look that up on Google it real quick? Numinous, N-U-M-I-M-O-U-S. Explanation of encounters with the numinous. What's the definition of numinous?
Having a strong religious or spiritual quality, indicating or suggesting the presence of a divinity.
Okay, strong religious or spiritual quality indicating the presence of a divinity. Okay. The reason I'm using numinous, and what you could use there is maybe sacred or glorious or something like that, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use a word that if I'm trying to communicate the value of the Christian belief system, how can I do it in maybe a theistically neutral way? Because whether or not a person believes in God, there are encounters with the numinous. I mean, even atheists, let's say what's an encounter with the numinous? An encounter, like, perhaps, you ever have a dream and you feel like the dream is telling you something important about life? I think everybody has that. And there's all kinds of attempts to try to explain that scientifically, but there are certain things that you just can't explain scientifically. Encounters with the numinous. And so it's an encounter in your life. Paul's, on the words of Damascus, when Paul got converted, that is an encounter with the numinous. When Jacob's ladder is an encounter with the numinous. When Abraham got visited by the three men, and then he winds up talking to them as if they're God, that is an encounter with the numinous. So what you see in the Bible is a narrative history of people's encounters with the numinous. And imagine a situation in which you wake up and you're on a deserted island and you know nothing, and there's all these people and you all know nothing, and you're trying to make sense of why you're there and what's going on. So everybody's looking for clues to your existence and why you're there. So anytime somebody has something that seems to convey any kind of meaning, which lasts through time, you write that stuff down and you collect it. So you could say that the Bible is a collection of such things, where here's mankind on earth, we have encounters with the numinous, and we have behavior, we want behavior which results in the most consequences, most desirable consequences, and we also kind of see these two things as connected. Like if you have positive encounters with the numinous, and you can explain them well, it should result in behaviors which produce the most desirable consequences. Tracking? So we want to try to view the Bible, I try to view the Bible agnostically and multi-perspectively, even if that's not how I really believe about it. And we'll talk about more of that in a second. So, problems. When, y'all know what the word codified means? If this becomes codified, it can be useful, or it can be catastrophic. So what do you mean? If I take all the sets of behaviors which wise people have collected and say these behaviors produce the most desirable consequences, it's easy if I take, well, we've taken 60, 70 years to learn these behaviors, so I'm just going to write them all down and I'm going to teach them to you when you're 5, you see? Well, to a 5-year-old, that can be very useful, and that can prevent you from having undesirable consequences of bad behavior because you learn from other people's mistakes. But what it could also do is it could cause you to put together an organization that kills people and burns them at the stake for 1,000 years too. You see, when that codification replaces the unknown numinous, that becomes a problem. Now people start worshiping the codification of all the collected wisdom rather than the wisdom itself. Okay, so that could be useful or it can be catastrophic. So we want to stop at useful and not become catastrophic with how we codify things. And we want things to be codified loosely, and we don't want to be emotionally attached to the codification. So there are rules that you follow. So you tell a little kid, don't hit people. And you could expand that into maybe don't cut off someone's leg either, right? Because that would be really bad. And I think that's a general rule you can tell a 5-year-old, hey, we have a rule in the house, nobody's allowed to cut off anyone's leg. And that would be probably a great rule for a 5-year-old, but you know as well as I do, there could come a point in time, say you're on the battlefield somewhere, and somebody's got their foot caught in a chain and a grenade's about to go off or something like that. make a split decision to cut their leg off to save the rest of them, all right? Now, there is no real codification that can tell you how to behave in every situation like that, but you can develop the wisdom to where you know when to break the rules, because breaking the rules in some situations is better than following the rules. And it is my belief is that Christianity is supposed to be put together that way, to where we have a set of things that we do, but sometimes it's time to cut the leg off, even though the general rule is not to. All right? And if you worship what is codified, people will get upset at cutting the leg off, even though you saved the person's life. And that's what we don't want, to get it backwards. We don't want to get our priorities and our set of values backwards to where we're worshiping and obeying the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. And the next thing we want is transformation of the individual from a person whose behavior brings about undesirable consequences into a person whose behavior brings about the most desirable consequences. So I'm going to start this with transformation. Now right there, a verse should pop in your head. Like, this is supposed to be a Bible study and we haven't talked about any Bible verses. Well, right here we're going to Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove, demonstrate, what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Ideally, what you want from the behavior which results in the most desirable consequences is for people to transform into a person who behaves in a way which results in the most desirable consequences. So the idea is that you start off with behavior that does not result in good consequences, and then over your life you transform probably multiple times. Now, one of the ways we do that is kind of circumambulatory. They say, what is circumambulatory? Well, ambulatory is to move around, and circum is a circle. So you're going to take a truth set and you're going to read it. And it could be the Bible, it could be a philosopher, it could be something else. And then you're going to go out and engage the world. You're going to get insight from what you read. So you read the Bible, you get insight from the Bible. Then you go out and you engage the world. Now that you have this insight, the world is able to present itself to you in a way that it was not able to present itself to you before. And then you transform as a result. And now, when you go back to the same source, you read the same thing again, and now because of the insight, because of the transformation, you come back to the same source. Now you see different and new insights that you could not see before. Does that make sense? So you're transforming, and that transforming process is a loop which should happen recurringly through your life as you gain insights, encounter the world. It presents itself in a way that it couldn't before. It transforms you. You go back to the source of information. Now you get new insights, and then you start that process all over again. That's what should be happening. If your codification is too strong, your statement of faith at your church, for example, is a codification of certain beliefs. If that is too strong, it will actually prevent this transformation. It will stand in the way of it and prevent you from doing that. Prevent you from receiving insights or being able to discern insights, or from being skeptical enough to reject bad insights, which may be encapsulated in a bad codification. All right? So you want transformation into a person that behaves this way over time. Now, the second prong down here is explanations of encounters with the numinous. Okay? And we presume that the numinous is a source of insight of some kind, but we don't understand it. I had a numinous experience recently, and I have not told anybody about this except for one person in my life, my significant other. But I've been trying to follow, the Bible talks about meditation a lot, so I've been trying to practice meditation and think about certain things in a certain way. And as one day this happened while I was driving, which I did not expect, and I'm glad I didn't have a wreck, but I had a moment where I had a piercingly clear vision of what seemed to be all reality and all people, and a way in which they are all related somehow from the same source, that kind of thing. And I can't explain, it's hard to put into words. I'm not trying to get into it here. But I had a numinous experience, and I can't explain it, and I'm not exactly sure what it means. And the closest thing that I could explain to, I've never tried, what do you call it, psychedelics. I've never tried psychedelics, but the closest thing that I could describe this as is what other people describe when they take psychedelics. I had a numinous experience. So what do I do with that? Well, don't start a religion with it. So this is going to follow this pattern here. The explanations of encounters with the numinous can also be codified. Well, I encountered the numinous, and here's what I think codified. My spelling's horrible. Codified, it can be functional, just like this codification can be useful, or it can actually hide reality. So if I have a numinous experience, and then I try to codify what that numinous experience means, I could be wrong. So then if you have a similar numinous experience, you could get different insight than what I got, which may be better, but for whatever reason you feel like you owe some kind of loyalty to how I codified mine, you see? And then you have just then been prevented from an insight into reality which you otherwise might have benefited from. I'm of the belief that when something is codified, it's more dangerous. There's more bad than good that comes from it. It seems functional at first, because as soon as you learn something like, well, how can I scale this and teach it to others so that they can also learn it? And if you're talking about maybe building a house or doing chemistry experiments or something like that, that comes in handy, that broadcast model of memetic transmission, putting information to the next person so that they can do a certain thing. But when you're coming down to trying to get in touch with base reality and encounters with the numinous and that kind of thing, codification brings with it historically more errors than help. So we want to be aware of the codification, maybe study it a little bit, but don't be emotionally attached to it. Don't identify yourself with it, and don't start making your living off of it, and don't start trying to climb a hierarchical structure based on the codification of either one of these kinds of functions of a religion. And so the way the current church model today, I think that it's kind of outlived its usefulness as far as where the church needs to go in the future and what it needs to grow into. Somebody asked me, we talked in the first couple of sessions that we had in here about the Ephesians 4 model and how you get to the point where the statement of faith can cause more harm than good, and maybe we should grow to a place where we don't have pastors and teachers so much anymore, but that everybody is providing the edification. And somebody said, well, would you join a church where, I just got this comment yesterday, would you join a church where you don't know what they believe? I'm like, well, there's so many things wrong with that question. Like, maybe joining a church isn't what we need to do anymore. Maybe in-group belonging needs, like I need to belong to a group, will cause you to defect on your own sense making in order to normalize with that group, and then you no longer have any insight to provide, which you otherwise would have had. And sometimes insight is disagreeable. I think I heard Eric Weinstein say recently that you owe the world your eyes, which is you have a perspective on things that nobody else has. And you have to be able to share that perspective for the benefit of other people. Maybe it's wrong, and maybe the benefit of you sharing it is so they can show you where you're wrong. Maybe that's the benefit, but at least now you know. Or maybe it's insightful and very helpful, and nobody would know about it until you share it. As soon as you start codifying things, what those are designed to do is it shuts down your capacity to share your perspective. Because now I have to put my perspective aside in order to normalize with the in-group to join this in-group. And now I may be defecting on my own sense-making to take this group's sense-making instead of mine. And so he's like, would you join a church? And so, or you don't know what they believe. Well, I think a church should be put together based on, like science. I think it's a mistake to think that scientific conclusions are science. That's not science. Science is a process which is supposed to result in certain conclusions. So if you have a bunch of scientists coming together to work on something, they don't agree on the conclusions as a basis of working together. They agree on the process as a basis of working together. So would I participate in a group that uses this process? Yes, I would. Would I join that group? Why would you need to? All right, so, I mean, people are asking, the questions that people are asking show that their mind is stuck somewhere in the past with a bad way of thinking that is not epistemologically sound. When it comes to participating in information exchange, men will modify what they share, the insight that they share, because of ranking. In other words, I want to appear to be an expert. I want to appear to be smarter than the guy next to me, or like I know more. So men tend to, and this is not everybody, but they tend to be willing to introduce junk into the information ecology because it provides them the advantage of ranking higher than the next guy. Women tend, this is a tendency, tend to modify based on in-group belonging needs. So women need to belong to a group. I'm not saying they need to, and I'm not saying they all believe this, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but this is experimental information they've tested. A woman will modify what she believes in order to stay normalized with the in-group because there's security in being part of a group. A man will normalize with the in-group in order to rank high in that group. So he wants to rank in the group, woman wants to be a part. Both of them are defecting on their own sense-making in order to achieve these two or secure these two. What we want to be able to do is share our perspective without sacrificing it to either of these two needs. That's a lot to think about. It's probably not something you hear in church a lot. So B, again, is transformation. And the transformation here, with encounters with the numinous, is transformation of the individual from one who does not understand the numinous into a person who does understand the numinous. Now, a paradigm of thought, in other words, the codification, of what encounters with the numinous means. In other words, I write down, here's everything we learned from Jacob's ladder and from Moses on Mount Sinai and from everything that Paul learned from Jesus. And I'm not just gonna put the information out there and let it generate insight in you. I'm gonna try to tell you what it means, because our denominational stance is that it means this, right? Well, what that codification of the encounters with the numinous does is it creates a, it's the word I'm looking for, a counterfeit. a counterfeit transformation. So if I have a good mind, a high IQ, I can learn what's been codified, and then I can behave as if I have transformed into a person who really gets the numinous, but really I really don't. And so in the East and West, you have opposite views of this. In the East, in the West, we don't understand this problem, so we codify everything. And then we memetically transmit everything. So if you're a Christian and you want to work as a Christian, well, you need to go to church and learn about Christianity. You get it memetically transferred to you. And then if you want to be a professional Christian, then you got to go to seminary and learn more about Christianity, which you don't. But that's the idea. And if you learn all that, all you're doing is learning information, which instead of the transformation, you get a counterfeit transformation where now you are a person who was ignorant of the codification. Now you are informed of the codification to the point where you are approved by the constituency of people who are also informed of the codification. How well can you memorize and transmit that back with fidelity? And how clever are you at coming up with post hoc rationalizations to justify how we have decided to codify encounters with the numinous? And that is how people rank within the in-group, to where you can become the pastor, then you can become, the bishop and the cardinal or whatever. Now you're the regional director of the denomination or what, and then pretty soon you're the denominational president. Your ranking needs come up with how well people think you can transmit the codification with fidelity and how clever you are at justifying it and how well they think you're living it. And all the while, this whole thing is counterfeit because no transformation has actually taken place. And we want transformation to take place, both here with the behavior and here with understandings of and encounters with the numinous. And the numinous is what in Christianity we call God. But I think that anybody from any culture with any set of beliefs would have to acknowledge there is something numinous that we don't understand and don't know. Now, a truly numinous encounter. Tell me, what emotion would a numinous encounter invoke in you?
Like peace.
I would think, I think if you understand it, yes.
Fear.
That's right. That's right. Fear. Fear. Every time somebody shows up in the Bible and they have a numinous encounter, what's the first thing out of that angel's mouth?
Not be afraid.
Don't be afraid. Fear
The
not.
reaction is always fall to your face, right?
Yeah, you fall to your face, they're prostrate, they're scared to death. Fear. Socrates and Plato, or Aristotle and Plato, use the word wonder. And by this, Aristotle meant curiosity, and I can't spell. And Plato meant awe. And I would say that you probably need both. You have awe, curiosity, fear, and another way I might word fear is sheer horror. I think you can see this on the screen. Sheer horror, absolute sheer horror. All this together, wonder, curiosity, awe, fear, sheer horror, this nurtures your sense making. Now, I'm going to connect all this. Codification, statement of faith, writing down everything we think we've learned and make you memorize it. Codification of what we think we have learned, explanations of encounters with the numinous, is designed to stop this from occurring. If you are in genuine terror, what's the number one thing you want to happen? You want it to stop.
Deliverance from evil.
Yeah, deliverance from evil. You want it to stop. And so a codification, having an explanation of the numinous, sometimes it's just a post hoc explanation. It's not really true, but it's functional, right? You memorize the codification. Then when something numinous happens to you, instead of being in this state of fear and wonder, curiosity and awe, and maybe sheer horror, where you are about to start nurturing your own sense-making, you instead hijack all this and sidestep it, and you go to what has been codified, and you just use that to explain what you have encountered. And that could be wrong. So what happens is you fail to transform. So codification of explanations of the encounters with the numinous stops, it's a preventative technique from you conducting your own sense making. And if you want to conduct good sense making, you want to get here as often as you can. Which means when you read the Bible, if you read the Bible without any codification whatsoever, you think it's true, but you don't understand any of it, this should probably scare the fire out of you. It's a frightening book. It's a very frightening book. It's a very scary book, a very weird, strange book, if you think about it. But it's been so codified, and we've had this so memetically transmitted into us, that we no longer enter this. What should be happening when we read the Bible should be this. And that's not happening because we've got too much of this. So codified, notice the root word is code. Now if you had a computer, do you want just any code coming into your computer? No, you don't. And we pay a lot of money for antivirus software to prevent that from happening. And as your own computing system, your own sense-making system, you need to have a healthy dose of skepticism to prevent code from coming into your machine. And you should be asking the question, well, I don't know what that code is going to do to me. I don't know how that code is going to disrupt my file processing system. So I'm not just going to let any code come into my head. So anytime somebody tries to memetically transmit some sort of codified system of beliefs into me, I need to be skeptical about that and try to evaluate what it's going to do to my sense-making system before I just take it in. Because the real place that I'm going to learn something that's going to be transformative is going to be here, where you have an encounter with the numinous and you have sheer horror and fear and wonder and curiosity and awe, and you just don't know. And post hoc, and people say, as soon as you say something, people have answers for it. I saw a ghost and I think it was my grandfather. Well, you're going to have 15 people say, well, that's just a demon, because demons know what your grandfather looked like and they're just there to deceive you. Well, I know that's an answer. But that comes from a post hoc rationalization of the event with them going back to what's been codified into them, and they're no longer examining the situation for insight. They're just avoiding whatever insight might be there and replacing it with the codification that's been memetically transmitted into their sense-making system. So in other words, they have a virus which is effectively preventing them from any transformation that may take place. And every codified system of beliefs should be viewed as a potential system virus which can come in and infect you. And you should be careful. And you should have a healthy dose of skepticism before you just let that thing come in. Take this concept of virus. Now, right now, we have a big scare going around, like the coronavirus, right? And I have the date up here. Today is March 10th, 2020, and it is now, 7:18 in the morning. So that's the coronavirus. I'm saying that really for the benefit of the people on the video, 'cause, you never know how old that'll be. The coronavirus is a big deal right now. Now, you think of a virus, think of the word meme, and a meme is an abstract pattern replicator, and that coin was termed as a neologism from Dawkins in 1976, and he's trying to come up with a word for ideas that kind of sounds like gene, okay? And a gene, viruses, bacteria, they have genes, and let's talk about diseases that transmit in humans. Imagine the virus as a plant and all the humans are soil, and humans represent a different fitness landscape for this virus to thrive. And that virus is going to spread to as many people as it can spread to thrive, and as it spreads, it's going to encounter resistance, which is going to kill some of the virus, but some of the smaller strains are going to survive, and now you have a different strain of the virus. Now I want you to think of memes is an idea virus. Well, let's say it's an idea which might be a virus. It could be good, because there's some good bacteria. There's some, I don't know if there's good viruses. I know there's good bacteria. But a meme is an idea. An idea spreads around, and the people are the soil for it. Now, if you have a virus, it has you. You don't have it. You're possessed by something that you don't want. Well, since an idea is in the mind, not in the body, if you have a cold, your mind knows you don't want the cold. If you have a sickness of the mind, an idea, a bad idea, it affects them. So the problem there is that your mind thinks it's good. That's part of the problem with an idea virus. You like it, and you are fertile soil for this idea, this virus to grow, and this virus might not take so well in me, so then it moves on to Chris, and that's where it thrives, and then it kind of morphs a little bit, and then it moves over to Ashley, and then it thrives, and it morphs a little bit, and you have different strains of the virus, different strains of the idea complex. So why do we have so many different denominations of Christianity? Because basically you've taken a codified version of what's the best behavior and what's the best explanation for encounters with the numinous. And as it spreads around to people, you can imagine the globe kind of like as a petri dish with a bunch of viruses in there, and they're each trying to find a different fitness landscape where they can thrive, and they mutate into different strains as needed in order to keep surviving. So each meme turns into a meme complex, which is a set of ideas that all go together. And some of those ideas are propagation memes, which help it spread. And some of them are protection memes, which are designed to protect the central meme, whatever the main central meme of that idea set is. Then it spreads that way. So every time an idea complex, every time you're exposed to one, as soon as you buy into it, you have just lost the ability to recognize its damage to you, and you think it's doing you good because it's in the mind. So you need to be skeptical of it before you allow it to do that to you. And don't just let anything in. And I'll say that to anybody in a video or present with me. I'll say that to anybody. Anytime I speak, you should be listening to me through your antivirus and maybe rejecting a majority of what I say. Maybe that's the best thing to do. But then maybe there's a little bit of signal in there too, so you take out whatever is true signal and do not take whatever codified meme complex might come along with it. You know, kind of like a bait and switch thing. Thought I was selling you this one thing, but you wind up buying all this other stuff with it. Like when you go buy a gun, you're not really buying a gun. You're buying a bunch of gun cleaning supplies and ammo and extra barrels. You know what I mean? You're not. There's stuff that comes along with ideas that you accept that you may not realize, the epiphenomenal effects of the ideas that we accept. What I wanted to do today, last week we said we're going to start talking about Romans, all right? And I was teetering between just going through that or maybe taking a couple of minutes to do this and then do that. Because I want you to understand where I'm coming from as we explore this. I want to apply first principles thinking to everything we encounter in the text. And I don't want to try to justify or refute whether or not it belongs to any of the known existing meme complexes that we know of today. I'm not going to be trying to justify any particular denomination or anything like that. We're just going to be trying to go through these narratives and what's being revealed as the basics, without trying to codify it, without trying to convince anybody to believe a certain set of things as a result of it. We're just going to examine it like it is. So we've got about 5 minutes left, but as a preview, what we're going to get into, I have this arrow here going in the narrative. We're talking about the narrative of Scripture. Next week, what we're going to study is, now last week we finished up our transformation, our timeline, our phase lines going through the New Testament, right? And one of the big things we've been emphasizing in those phase lines is the transition from a Jewish mindset to a Jew-Gentile mindset with no division between them. Okay? Y'all remember that? So what we're going to do, before we start looking into Romans, well, this is like the start of looking into Romans. You have to contextualize where the book is coming from. And we're going to look at a string of information that's found in Leviticus 26, Isaiah 6, Ezekiel 12, and I'm doing this from memory, so Matthew 13, and Mark 4. I'm the kind of person I have to sing my ABC song every time I alphabetize something. Luke 8. I forgot how to spell 8. John 12. Acts 28. Romans 9. And among other places, 1 Thessalonians 2, I believe. And say, what am I tying together here? We're going to be looking at the systemic hardening and blinding of Israel. As a result of sin. As a result. So they have had encounters with the numinous, and they have rejected and rebelled against those encounters and behaved in a way that was not in alignment with their encounters with the numinous. God warns them We got a couple minutes left, so this is kind of a preview. God warns them in Leviticus 26, if you disobey me, here's what's going to happen. And he gives them what some people call 5 cycles of discipline. Like, if you disobey me, this is going to happen. You keep disobeying me, this is going to happen. You keep disobeying me, there's 5 levels of that. And then right now we are in the fact that Israel got, Jerusalem got destroyed in 70 AD, and it stayed destroyed and without Jewish inhabitant until 1948. That is the 5th cycle of discipline. You add up all those other 4, the 5th, rejecting the Messiah 4 times in a row, bam, that's it, you're done. So we're in the 5th cycle of discipline. In Isaiah 6, we have a prophecy about the hardening and the blinding of Israel based on their behavior. That's reiterated in Ezekiel 12. Matthew 13, Mark 4, Luke 8, John 12, Acts 28, and Romans 9 all quote back to this and this, with hints of this in it, to show that God is hardening and blinding Israel as a result of their rejecting the Messiah 4 times in a row. 2 Thessalonians 2 has one little verse in there about the wrath of God is on them to the uttermost. And you can't understand that phrase without understanding what led up to it, because people get the wrong idea if you don't put all this together. So we're going to be trying to construct, basically trying to put together, here we are in 2020 as Gentiles trying to read, study, follow, and understand the Bible, all right? Well, for all this stuff that was so Jewish, how did we get here? And this is part of that story. And then after this, after we look at that transition, we are then going to go into Romans. And as we look at the epistles, you have to understand them in the context of the book of Acts in which they were written, because Paul is writing most of his epistles as he's going through the book of Acts, starting around chapter 13 or so. And when you understand that, the epistles make a lot more sense interpreting them in light of what's going on in the book of Acts, rather than interpreting them in light of whatever codified system of beliefs has been medically transmitted to us by our religious denomination today in 2020. Make sense? Did what we're talking about today make sense? All right. So I guess that's it. Unless there's any comments or discussion or anything.
Have you read the book God Is Not Great?
I've heard of it.
So I read it like 9 months ago. And I gotta say, there's not really much in there that I disagreed with, but it was, I think what he does is he takes examples of all people who have taken the codified portion of religion to catastrophic extremes and done not so great things.
So I would probably agree with most. If God was only manifested through people that have claimed to follow him in my lifetime, I wouldn't believe in God either. You know what I'm saying? I think God is more bigger and deeper than how people have chosen to try to represent him on his behalf.
Like you said, you don't like the word religion, and I don't either. So the subtitle of the book is actually How Religion Destroys Everything, which there in and of itself, you can understand the authors. So he's a well-known atheist.
Yeah.
And so you can see in the title of his book the fact that he's an atheist when the main title is God Is Not Great, and then the subtitle is How Religion Destroys Everything. It's right the same thing.
God Is Not Great, How Religion Destroys Everything?
Yep.
So who's the author of that?
Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's a well-known atheist.
Was, right? Didn't he die? I think he passed away.
I guess, I don't remember.
Yeah.
But that name is certainly a household name when it comes to atheism. So that's interesting, yeah. I think in a debate between atheists and Christians, I think about 90% of what the atheists have to say is valid based on the catastrophic consequences of religion,
yeah.
like of codified religion. not necessarily sound explanations of encounters with the numinous, if you will. But yeah, I like it that you read things from a non-Christian perspective. And I think Christians should do that. I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot by not doing that. I have found recently that there are very few Christian authors, in my opinion, that you can get anything valuable from. A lot of it's just post hoc rationalizations of codification. Yeah. I'll be mentioning some of those names as we go. Eventually we're going to talk about wisdom and what that is.
When I graduated from Command Staff last year and earned my 3rd master's degree, I was like, I have way too much worldly knowledge and not enough godly wisdom. So since then I've been reading like a proverb almost every single day. I'm not perfect on it.
Like a chapter? You read them with the month?
Yeah, reading with month.
Yeah,
Exactly. So
31 Proverbs. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is take some of what I've been covering here and then cover wisdom. Basically, when we talk about wisdom, we're going to talk about some of the definitions that the philosophers have tried to give to the term. And then we're going to hash that out and see if they're valid or not in here with a discussion. And then you take that and go back into the book of Proverbs. When you read the word wisdom, when you see that where it says wisdom, it might be insightful. It might bring new insights to the book that we didn't see before. But I have basically 2 sets. I have a set of 5 things that wisdom is supposed to be, and then another person gave a set of 3 things, and another person gave a set of 2 things that those other 5 and 3 need to have in order to be valid. So I think that'll be fruitful when we come to that. That was a good comment there. Are we ready to close for the day? We'll come back next week.